Hi, welcome to another midweek message. Yesterday afternoon, my wife and I washed our nearly 16-year-old car. And when we were done with that, it looked significantly better. But I realized something in the process. No matter how it looked, underneath, it's still a 16-year-old car with almost 390,000 miles. We were able to make the outside look a little better, but we weren't able to change what was underneath. I got to thinking about that, and it reminded me of some of Jesus' teaching in Matthew chapter 23. In Matthew chapter 23, Jesus issued some of his sternest rebukes, some of his harshest rebukes for those who were being hypocritical. 8 times in Matthew chapter 23, Jesus said, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites." In Matthew 23, beginning in verse 1, Jesus spoke to the crowds and to his own disciples and said to them, "The scribes and the Pharisees have seated themselves in the chair of Moses. Therefore, all that they tell you, do and observe. But do not do according to their deeds, for they say things and do not do them. They tie up heavy burdens and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves are unwilling to move them with so much as a finger." Jesus describes one of the manifestations of hypocrisy, that is, teaching a standard and being unwilling to live by the same standard. To say and not do. The scribes and Pharisees of Jesus' day wanted everyone around them to live by the strictest standards of the law and even beyond the law of Moses, the traditions that they had imposed upon the law. Jesus said that so far as they teach what Moses instructed, those things everyone needed to do. But they didn't need to follow the example of the scribes and Pharisees who considered themselves exempt from the law. They were teaching one standard and living by something far less. If we are guilty of the same, then we are guilty of the same hypocrisy as they were. Jesus continued beginning in verse 5 of the same chapter. "But they do all their deeds to be noticed by men. For they broaden their phylacteries and lengthen the tassels of their garments. They love the place of honor at banquets and the chief seats in the synagogues, and respectful greetings in the marketplaces, and being called Rabbi by men. But do not be called Rabbi, for one is your teacher, and you are all brothers. Do not call anyone on earth your father, for one is your Father, he who is in heaven. Do not be called leaders, for one is your leader, that is Christ. But the greatest among you shall be your servant. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself shall be exalted." Jesus addressed a second manifestation of hypocrisy. That is, the desire for attention. To be esteemed in the sight of men, to be recognized by men as something great, when the truth of the matter is, you're not living by the same standards you're teaching. Doing the external things to be noticed by men, but not addressing the internal matters of the Spirit. Jesus said, no one ought to be esteemed on that level, that true spiritual leadership comes from above, that spirituality begins with humility. If we're guilty of the same, then we're guilty of the same hypocrisy as the scribes and Pharisees. If what we are doing spiritually, religiously, is merely to be noticed by men so that our friends and family members will think that we're good people, that the people that we go to church with will not give us a hard time, if that's all it's about, then we're guilty of the same hypocrisy as they. Jesus continued in Matthew 23 and addressed a third manifestation of hypocrisy. He said in verse 23 beginning, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you tithe mint and dill and cumin, and have neglected the weightier provisions of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. But these are the things you should have done without neglecting the others. You blind guides who strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. Jesus said their hypocrisy manifests itself in their picking and choosing among the law. That is, deciding that they would do some things, but they would ignore other things. And particularly, they would do the easier things, maybe small in comparison, but those that pertain to the physical activity, and rather neglected the more difficult things that are matters of the heart. They would tithe the smallest herbs of their garden, but yet they had neglected the weightiest matters of all that pertain to the change of heart that God really wanted in His people. If we, like them, pick and choose, maybe we'll do certain things God requires and ignore other things that are more difficult or are inconvenient for us, then we are no better than the scribes and Pharisees that Jesus calls hypocrites. They would teach but not do. And what they did only for the attention of men, and they picked and chose those things that worked for them while neglecting the things that God ultimately requires. You see, hypocrisy, being one thing on the outside and inwardly something else, Jesus describes as He continues, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you clean the outside of the cup and of the dish, but inside they are full of robbery and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and of the dish, so that the outside of it may become clean also. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you are like whitewashed tombs, which on the outside appear beautiful, but inside they are full of dead men's bones and all uncleanness. So you too outwardly appear righteous to men, but inwardly you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness." When we wash the outside and neglect the inside, we are no better than they. We are like they were whitewashed tombs, made beautiful in appearance, but inwardly full of the same spiritual neglect and decay. I can wash a 16-year-old 390,000-mile automobile, but that doesn't change what it really is. If I'm going to change what I really am, it's more than putting on appearances. It's more than what I teach. It's more than what I do for the attention of men. It's more than the picking and choosing. It's about changing myself within, changing who I am. If we're going to free ourselves of that hypocrisy, to become what we really ought to be, we must get beyond what Paul calls in 2 Timothy 3 as having a form of godliness, an appearance of godliness, but rather allow godliness to have its transforming effect within us. May God bless us to that end, that in the end we're not whitewashed tombs, but tombs that have been purified and made clean from the inside out, that we might truly give glory to God. Thanks for watching.